In 1969 the two pillars of the communist bloc, the Soviet Union and the People's Republic of China, nearly went to full-scale war. Years of deteriorating ties between the two countries, once the staunchest of allies, finally led to skirmishing on the long mutual border between the two countries. While tensions were eventually de-escalated, what if the two countries had gone to war? On March 2, 1969, Soviet troops patrolling Damansky Island Zhenbao, on the Ussuri River, came under fire from Chinese troops. The attack, just 120 miles from the major Soviet city of Khabarovsk, killed 50 Soviet troops and wounded many more. The Moscow believed that the attack was premeditated, with Beijing bringing in a special combat unit to ambush Soviet forces. Alleged atrocities against wounded Soviet troops made the Soviet leadership furious. Soviet border guards counterattacked Chinese forces in and around the island on March 15. According to the CIA, killing hundreds of Chinese troops. Clashes continued through the spring and summer, and by August, CIA Director Richard Helms had informed the press that the Soviet leadership had been discreetly inquiring with foreign governments about their opinion on a preemptive strike on China. While the crisis between the Soviet Union and China was eventually de-escalated, what if it hadn't? The Soviet Union regarded China's leadership, as Robert Farley has pointed out, as abjectly insane, and may have wanted to nip a festering problem in the bud. Whether that would have increased security in the long term is another question. While China did not appear to want war nor have the resources to prosecute one, the Soviets indeed had the option of doing so. The Soviet Union had been steadily growing its ground forces in the region since the first signs of a split in the early 1960s. The number of ground combat divisions increased from 13 in 1965 to 21 divisions by 1969. While a considerable amount of firepower, this paled compared to the sheer size of the 2,500-mile-long border. Soviet forces in the region were also in large part defense-oriented machine gun and artillery divisions, and incapable of offensive action. Meanwhile, over the border, the U.S. State Department estimated Chinese forces in Manchuria to consist of 2 divisions of border guards, 24 infantry divisions, 2 tank divisions and 6 artillery divisions. If the Soviet Union had chosen war, it would have had 2 choices. The first choice would have been a conventional mechanized attack into Manchuria, where much of China's industry was located, coupled with a limited counter-force nuclear strike against Chinese nuclear forces and nuclear research facilities. A Soviet attack into Manchuria in 1969 would have resembled the invasion of the same region in 1945 against Japanese forces, and would likely have followed the same invasion route. Such an attack would likely have been more modest in scope and focus. The 1945 attack had been carried out by 15 million troops by a fully mobilized Soviet Union. An attack in 1969 would likely have been carried out by half as many troops but with more firepower, supported by modern armor, artillery, tactical air forces and possibly even tactical nuclear weapons. A second option would have been the same nuclear strikes against China's new nuclear weapons program without an accompanying invasion of Manchuria. China had tested its first nuclear weapon in 1964 and conducted its first underground nuclear test in 1969. It is not clear whether or not any of China's nuclear weapons would have been usable in a war with the Soviet Union, but Moscow could not have afforded to find out the hard way. One major question is whether or not the Soviet Union would have coupled an attack on China's nuclear weapons with a thermonuclear attack on Beijing and China's leadership. An attack on Beijing by just one Soviet SS-8 intercontinental ballistic missile, armed with a 23-megaton thermonuclear warhead, would have obliterated the city and killed more than half of the city's 76 million residents. On the plus side, Soviet attacks would have played to Moscow's strengths in both nuclear and conventional forces. The Soviet army would have made rapid gains on the battlefield, pitting modern mechanized forces against poorly equipped Chinese infantry and obsolete tanks. On the minus side, a nuclear strike against China would have earned the Soviets worldwide condemnation. An attack into Manchuria would have also played to China's People's War strategy of slowly dissolving invading forces with a combination of Chinese army forces and peasant militias. China's leadership, which had already proven itself bloody-minded against its own people, would have had little compunction in sacrificing millions in a war against the Soviets. From the Soviet perspective, a grinding, never-ending war with China had no clearly defined ending. A Soviet attack against China would have been a tactical success but a strategic failure, or worse, an open-ended strategic commitment that would have dwarfed the invasion of Afghanistan.